An insider has dropped a bombshell Islanders trade report, and this is really not getting enough attention, especially with all the noise around the Islanders right now, with the first overall pick, with all the trade rumors with Noah Dobson and James Higgins. I really think this rumor is going under the radar, and if the Islanders were not such an interesting team right now, this would really be what we were focused on this channel. And we're going to discuss why I honestly think making this move for Mathew Barzal might be the most sneaky and intelligent thing he can do at the draft. Of course, other than drafting Matthew Schaefer. Really quickly, before we get into that, we noticed that 65% of you who watch these videos have not yet subscribed to the channel. So if you're an Islander fan, you want more Islanders content just like this, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe. It's free. And I cannot wait to see what today holds for the Islanders. I will say, if really no trades happen and all the Islanders do is draft first overall, don't be disappointed. This is still a huge milestone and great day for this franchise. Still, there's a big chance that other things might happen today for the Islanders, and that goes beyond just a potential trade for James Higgins. I feel like with all the Higgins, the Dobson talk, one thing that has not been focused on is Jean-Gabriel Pageau, and that is a name that really should be getting more attention, especially with the trade rumors also flowing around him. Michael Russo has reported that JG Pageau is one of the players the Wild are heavily interested in adding to their bottom six. And this is something the Islanders should definitely consider doing. We really have not addressed the extent of how rough the depth market in the NHL is. We've talked about it a little bit, but because the Islanders are pretty solid when it comes to their depth, really the issue with the Islanders is top end talent. We've kind of glossed over it at points, but the NHL is in a weird position this season where there are so many teams, at least what they're saying right now, there are so many teams that are trying to be competitive, and it really feels like there's a shortage of players that these teams need. And as a result, players like Pageau are a lot more valuable than they've been in previous seasons. I think teams are kind of looking, especially teams like Minnesota, are kind of looking at the division. And while typically a Pageau trade would more take place at the deadline, they might be looking around and saying, well, if we don't add a player like Pageau now, with how stacked our division is, there might not be a deadline where we are buyers. Now, Stefan Rosner has said that it would not be negligence for the Islanders to wait to trade Pageau until the deadline, and I completely agree with that. The Islanders should only trade Pageau if it's an offer they cannot refuse, as Rosner has rightly pointed out, especially with Islander fans saying that it would be a mistake if they don't move Pageau now. There really is no rush unless they desperately need more cap space because a Noah Dobson extension is more expensive than he anticipated, but even then, there are other players you can move other than Pageau that also free cap that. With Pageau, typically you would want to trade him at the deadline, but I think it's becoming clear, especially with some of these trade rumors, the team's interested, and really the moves they're making is one thing I really want to hone in on. If you look at the Wild's trades today, they made several moves clearing up space in their bottom six, almost to the point where they're already committing to bringing in a player, which just gives the Islanders more value when it comes to a player like Pageau, because when you look around the league and you look at the bottom six centers available right now that are really ideal for playoff teams, the list is really thin. I mean, some people are talking about Pius Suter, and even him, I would not really value him as, I think he's a good third-line center, but if I'm trying to make a deep run in the playoffs, I don't even know if he would be something I'd be interested in. In addition, teams like the Kings have gone as far to say as they're looking for a top 9 forward, and they're willing to pay a first-round pick. And that is really what I'm focusing on in this video. If this is true, if the Kings, perhaps even teams like the Wilds, are interested in trading a first-round pick for a top 9 player, especially in this draft that's considered to be a little weaker, but I still think, in my opinion, there is a lot of talent to be gotten later in the rounds of this draft. In fact, when I was looking earlier on in the season, when I didn't think the Islanders would have the first overall pick, I did a lot of research on some of these players, and I think there's a good amount of players that can be gotten into the late 20s of this draft, and that's not even considering teams reaching on picks that really should not be in those top 20. If the Islanders can land a first-round pick for JG Pageau, they should do it. I know Pageau has done a lot for the Islanders, and he had a really good year for the team last year, but even if the Islanders' goal is to be competitive next season, I don't think Pageau leaving takes such a step back for the team. Again, while he does provide a lot, his face-offs are something that's incredible, and it's really why I think teams will value him so much. He's the type of player that I think is really valuable once you get into the playoffs. The Islanders' issue, again, is having enough skill to even be in that conversation. And I think even if you're Pageau is leaving the Islanders, if a player like Callum Ritchie's coming in and playing that third line center role instead and potentially adding a little more offense if he pans out, I think that's ideal. And looking at Pageau, last season, 14 goals, 28 assists for 42 points. He had a really good year. But let's face it, that's pretty much what Pageau is. When it comes to Pageau, he's really not the type of player like Brock Nelson who's going to command more than a first-round pick. In fact, I don't really know if Pageau is even good enough to command a first-round pick. Before seeing this tweet, I was more thinking a second rounder plus. If you can get a second rounder or a prospect that's second round level and a little bit more, that would be a good deal for Pageau. If it is possible for the Islanders to land a first round pick, and just looking about how many teams are talking about how they're willing to move draft capital to improve their team this season, I think that is a possibility. And in that case, I think the Islanders should just make this move now. There's no reason to take a risk with Pageau, wait the season out just to see what they can get. If the value is already there, if teams with the GMs like Ken Holland are desperate enough to trade for Pageau now and give up what they would at the deadline anyway. And we know how interested the Kings have been in Pageau in the past. I know it's a new general manager, but if you think about Ken Holland, if there's any player on the Islanders that's a Ken Holland guy, he loves those depth guys who get paid a little too much money. Pageau would be right down his alley. And if this is something he's interested in, even if the Islanders have to give like a third round pick back, I think it's something they have to do. And if they do, if they can get back later in the first round, I know fans want to talk about James Higgins, and that's the only player they really want the Islanders to trade back in. If they can get back in this draft and draft a player such as Logan Hensler or any of those guys who I really like later in this draft, Blake Flidler, this would be a huge win for the Islanders. Now, interestingly enough, looking at the Minnesota Wild, they do not have a first-round pick in this year's draft, which does make things a bit more tricky when it comes to a Pageau trade. Frankly, I think if all the Wild offer is their second-round pick, then I think the Islanders should wait. Like Stephen Rosser said, there's no rush to trade JG Pageau. If you can get more value at the deadline, you do wait to get more value. I just think based on how things are trending in the NHL, with how many teams seem desperate to add talent, I think they're going to be better offers. In fact, if Minnesota is bold enough to trade their 2026 first round pick, that is something that I would jump on right away and would be a huge opportunity for the Islanders. The Kings, however, are a team I think makes a bit more sense. They pretty much know what they have this year. They have a first round pick in this year's draft. They were actually considered to be interested in Pageau during this deadline, and they did not pull the trigger then. I really wonder if they're going to end up pulling the trigger now, especially now that they know where that pick is. They're going to know who's available when that pick comes, and this is something I can really see happening. Now, one thing I'm trying not to read too much into, but I bring them up, this is kind of what I tend to think about, is Pageau will be, at least at the start, he will be at the Islanders draft party. In addition, the draft is in LA, so I wonder if that kind of prevents them from wanting to trade their pick, and in addition prevents the Islanders from wanting to trade Pageau, considering he's going to be there with the fans, although I don't think that is a huge factor in something like this. And as Dennis Bernstein has said, the Kings are open to trade that pick in exchange for an established top 9 forward. Now, I don't know if that means like a younger player. It's really not specific, but in general, it seems like there's going to be a lot of interest around JG Pageau. In fact, it seems like there's going to be, well, obviously teams are not going to be offering as much. It seems like teams are just as interested to add a player like Pageau as they're interested in adding a player such as Dobson, just because of how competitive the NHL is and how many teams need centers. Like, it truly cannot be overstated how bad this center market is. And the Islanders are a lucky team where even if they trade Pageau, I think they're going to be all right on center. They have Matt Barzal, Bo Horvat, Casey Ciziquez. You have enough centers. Callum Ritchie coming up. Of course, McLean, completely forgot about him for a second. The Islanders have enough centers to get by, even without Pageau. And while I do think they would lose an element from him in the roster, I truly believe the plan is to trade him at the deadline anyway. So if you can get that return right now without risking losing him for nothing or getting injured, why wouldn't you take it? At least that's my thoughts. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think it's even possible for the Islanders to land a first-round pick for Pageau? Again, honestly, if the value isn't there, I think I'll wait and see what happens at the deadline. We've seen guys who are much less effective than Pageau, so does Scott Laughton, getting first round picks at the draft, not to take any at the deadline. Sorry, not to take any shots at Scott Laughton. He simply is not as effective as a player. And as a result, while I do think it's early for trades like this, I think teams are going to be more desperate than usual, at least to land centers. Honestly, especially considering how high the prices are right now. I mean, you think about how bad the center market was last season at the deadline. Got to imagine it's going to be even worse this season, and perhaps the prices are going to get even higher. But those are my thoughts on this. As always, if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. Catch you on the next episode of Islanders Digest. Let's go, Islanders.